Alright, let's get started on the Hangman tutorial. First thing I did was create a directory structure. Now there's no standard Python directory structure. You can set it up however you want, but the way I did it is fairly standard. You'll see this a lot on GitHub. I created a tests and a source directory. The license and intent wouldn't be necessary on Dev9 obviously, but those are necessary since it's in a GitHub repo. The unit tests would go into the test directory, and our modules would go into the source directory. For this project, we're just going to have the one Hangman. And notice I've already created a CLI directory as well. That's short for command line interface, which is where the executable will go. Python has a thing called entry points, which we'll talk about in a different video when we're creating the setup.py file. But for now, just know that the executable script will go in that CLI directory. Now this dictionary file I got off the internet isn't exactly what we're looking for yet. It's got some single letter words in there. If you keep going, it's got some words with like dashes or whatever. And I think to make it easier on the player, we should limit our word choices to, let's say, 5 characters minimum. That seems fair. So rather than write a script to do all that, I can do it directly in the interpreter in interactive mode. First thing I need to do is actually read the words in. This is a very standard thing you're going to do all the time in Python. You should go ahead and get in the habit now of specifying the read-write mode explicitly. In general, in Python, it's considered an axiom that explicit is better than implicit. You don't have to specify the read option here. It is the default, but there's no reason not to, and it's better to get in the habit of doing it up front. Just as it's better in the habit of getting used to creating variable names that make sense, that are useful, that aren't X. Now this is in the interpreter. No one's ever going to know what variable names I used, but you might as well just start with best practice right off the bat. Get used to doing it that way. So file handle in is a fairly standard way to label the file handle. Notice that I'm putting the read and the split lines on one line. That is also a fairly standard way to do this. One of the things you want to be careful of is that your line length doesn't get too long. That can be a code smell, and we'll talk about code smells in a separate video. But it's really pointless to split this into 2 separate lines. I'm not going to do anything with the intermediate line, so just put it all in one line. "41,000 words, but as we talked about, it's going to contain words like So to parse this down even further, we're going to use regular expressions, and we have to compile a pattern. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, I'll put some links below in the description that might be able to help you. The caret there means the beginning of the line. We want letters A through Z. We want 5 or more, and that's the end of the line. We should go ahead and test our pattern to make sure it's doing what we want. It should not match an A. Now the match method will actually return an object. You'll see here if I match apple. One of the nice things about the interpreter is it shows you the kind of object that was returned. I don't really need that match object. If it doesn't match anything, it just returns none, and that's all I care about. Check a 4-letter word, right, that does not match. Let's throw in some symbols in there. That should not match. Let's check white space. Pretty reasonable idea. Now, if this were real code in an application, we'd want unit tests, and we'd want to test edge cases. We'll get into that later. But for now, we know that pattern's pretty good. Rather than iterate through the raw list, I'm going to use something called a list comprehension. Now, if you're interested in more details about regular expressions, list comprehensions, those will be covered in in-depth videos. Now we've turned it down to 36,871 words. The last step is going to be printing these words out into a usable file. Now, I'm not going to put them back into a text file that my program would have to read every time. I'm actually going to put them into a Python module that can be imported. That way later I can also add functions or even static class methods that I can use on that dictionary. It just makes it more program friendly as opposed to putting it into a text file. Now there's no write line method when you're writing to a file handle, so you have to make sure that you specify the new lines. All right, so in Python you can use either double quotes or single quotes, as long as you can't mix them, like that won't work, but you can use single quotes or double quotes, and there is no standard. It falls in the same category as VI versus Emacs. There's plenty of flame wars out there about which one's best, but you can use either. It's better to remain consistent. I tend to use double quotes only because that's what I'm used to, and it really only matters when you have to combine them in the same line, and which is what we're going to do right here. So that is something to keep in mind on. I'm also going to use what's called an F string. I will cover that in an in-depth video as well. Now this isn't perfect because the last word will have a comma after it, which in Python is okay. When you're defining a list, you can have a comma after the last element and it doesn't cause any problems. There's that last comma I was talking about. But now I've got a list of words in a Python module. Notice that because it's a module and not an executable script, I don't need any shebang line in here. I see that all the time on code I see on the internet, and it's a bad practice. The only time you need to include a shebang line is when you have an executable script. I will cover that in an in-depth video. You also don't need to set the executable bit. All right, I should be able to import this now. And there you go. So in this video, we took the raw word list and we parsed it down into words that we want, put it into a Python module, and now we're ready to start using it.